All right, we're going to get started on this Community Infrastructure Services Committee meeting. There are 6 items for consent. Does someone want to move those? Moved by Councillor Ioannidis. Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We will now move into our first item, which is the 2019 Development Charges Overview, and we will have Mr. Heggie give us some opening remarks and introduce the consultant, who will have 10 minutes.
Sure. So thank you, Chair Galloway-Seelock and members of Council. This is our first of a few discussions we're planning to have about development charges. Our consultant firm that we're using is Hemson, and they will be going through a brief presentation which was provided to you late last week. Mr. Craig Binning is going to be coming and doing that presentation. He's also got Natalia Kalbas here with her, or with him, that's helping us out with our study. And so look forward to your comments and direction today, but we'll turn the rest of the presentation time over to Mr. Binning.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be before committee this afternoon. I'm going to move through the presentation relatively quickly. We're just going to give you an overview of where we're at in the study process, talk a little bit about the Development Charges Act itself, talk about some of the impact that we're seeing on development charge rates across the province, particularly here in Southern Ontario, talk somewhat about the engagement with Council and the stakeholders moving forward. I understand that many of you, or a number of you on Council, are new to development charges, so I'll just take a moment and be pleased to answer any questions at the back end. Basically, development charges are the fiscal tool made available to municipalities to fund what we refer to as the initial round of capital costs associated with meeting the increased needs arising from development. The idea is that as land gets developed, you add dwelling units and people living within those and new employment and the space that they live in. Municipalities need to increase the capacity of their infrastructure to meet those needs. And that first round of capital costs, and I'm stressing just capital, can be funded from development charges. The idea is that financing that initial round of capital shouldn't place an undue burden upon your existing ratepayers and taxpayers. The reason that we're doing this process right now is that under the Development Charges Act, which is provincial legislation, your current bylaw is set to expire on June 30th, 2019. The maximum life of a bylaw is 5 years, and so if you want to continue to collect development charges, you need to go through the background study process, which requires the release of a study, holding of a public meeting, and indeed our process allows for additional stakeholder consultation. One note that I would like to stress is that some of you may be aware that the province has undertaken consultation on potential amendments or changes to the Development Charges Act. They were held in December and January, and we're anticipating potentially seeing some changes to the legislation in March or April of this year. This next slide just provides an overview schematic of the development charge process that we undertake, and it's in conformity with the legislation. I will speak to it generally, but what we look to is looking out and seeing how much is the city going to grow by over our planning periods. And we're looking at a 10-year planning period and a slightly longer planning horizon for the engineered services. Then we've been working with staff and with approved council documents in terms of capital budgeting exercises to say, what is the capital needs arising from that development? What do we need to spend? Where do we need to expand facilities to meet that increased need from development? You will see there's a box up near the right that says 10-year historic service level. There's a fundamental concept under the Development Charges Act that says that we can't establish development charge rates at levels higher than the way in which the municipality has provided the service on average over the last 10 years. And that typically places a constraint on the development charge rates. Once we have that capital program, we need to make a number of deductions under the legislation. Things like if you're receiving any subsidies from upper levels of government, if a share of the program is benefiting or addressing existing needs, that has to be netted off. We take into consideration existing development charge reserve funds. And then that basically leaves us with the share of the capital program that is related to development and fundable from development charges under the legislative constraints, and then we allocate benefit to residential growth and non-residential growth and calculate the development charge rates. Just very quickly, this slide just provides some guidance on what the legislation says. The definition of eligible capital cost is actually quite broad under the Act, and it's almost every cost that you incur in order to deliver the capital infrastructure. Everything from the acquisition of land, the improvement of land, acquisition or construction of buildings, acquisition of fleet or rolling stock, most furniture and equipment, excluding some computer equipment, engineering fees, financing costs, and alike. On the other side of the slide, we have this ineligible cost, or perhaps ineligible services. When the Act was fundamentally changed in 1997, a number of services were no longer eligible for consideration for development charge funding. They include cultural and entertainment facilities, things like museums or theaters or art galleries. Tourism facilities are out. The acquisition of parkland. Of course, you continue to use your Planning Act dedication to acquire parkland, and we can use development charge money to develop parkland, but not to acquire additional land. Hospitals are not eligible, and headquarters for the general administration of the municipality. The services that we are examining under this background study process are consistent with the studies, the services that were examined previously by the City and form the basis of your current bylaw. The City does have a different structure to its charges in that there are some services that are funded largely on the suburban area, and then a fewer set of services that are funded on the central neighborhood, reflecting different servicing needs. The engineered services, the sanitary sewers, the roads and water, roads and related, water mains, some engineering studies, they are primarily funded against growth in the suburban area. Then there is a provision for intensification allowance, recognizing that there are some costs incurred in the central area to accommodate growth, and they're recovered through growth in that area. And then finally, stormwater management works, which are once again on the suburban area. The general services, or what sometimes we refer to as soft services, are library, fire protection, indoor recreation, outdoor recreation, public works, parking, cemeteries, and growth-related studies. And so, for example, under library, we're able to recover the cost of acquiring land for the libraries, the library buildings themselves, constructing them, the collection materials within them, and any furniture and equipment. And basically, that's the same for all other services. And for example, within fire, that also includes the rolling stock or the fire trucks. We're able to include those for recovery. As I alluded to in my introduction, we are seeing in some municipalities significant increases in the calculated rates between what was calculated some 5 years ago. There is annual provision for indexing to reflect some construction cost increases. However, we're finding that indexing is not keeping pace with the true cost of delivering the capital programs. Some of the major factors are that construction costs are increasing at rates faster than that indexing provides for. Also, land values have been increasing in most southern Ontario municipalities at a much faster rate than base indexing. The impact of the devaluation of the Canadian dollar over the last 5 years has also had the impact of the increased cost of acquiring assets that are often priced in or purchased from U.S. vendors. And then one of the other things that we're finding is that we've done an improved job in terms of identifying the historic service levels, which has the impact of increasing the potential recovery from future growth. With respect to policies, we're not proposing to make any fundamental changes to the policies incorporated in the existing bylaw. However, we look forward to going through this process both from Council and stakeholders. If there's areas that we would like to review and amend, then we're certainly open to considering those, and we'll look at best practices for other jurisdictions. And we're also keeping track with any changes that the region might be making as they're going through their development charge update process at this time as well. And I think many of you are probably aware that Cambridge is also doing an update, and the City of Waterloo has recently initiated an update, but that won't occur until sometime next year. We aren't seeking direction from Council today, but moving forward, some of the things that Council does need to give consideration to is the use of area rating versus municipal-wide charges. Kitchener has had a long history of doing area rating, and will continue to reflect past practices, and we'll come back to Council at the next meeting as to where we're going with those things. Ultimately, when Council passes the new bylaw, they will effectively be expressing their intent to undertake works in conformity with the rates that have been calculated and set out in the background study. And I understand you're going to have some additional information sessions on things like the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Ultimately, in the end, Council will be looking to approve the development charge rates, and likely what we'll come forward to is what we'll call the maximum permissible rates, and we'll talk about implementation options for Council if the rate of increases, if we are seeing an increase, are greater than what we want to carry forward or Council wishes to. As I've indicated, we're looking at having an open process. We're having this session with yourself today. We will be moving. We've already exchanged some information with the development community and other stakeholders, and we'll be continuing to have that dialogue in addition to what is the statutory minimum requirements. This next slide, which really rounds out my presentation, is just the project timelines. You can see that we're here in Q1 of 2019, the first line where we're presenting to yourselves just an information update. We're working with staff to finalize some policy consideration and refinements to the capital programs to arrive at some draft rates. We will continue through that process, and we're looking to have some engagement with the stakeholders either through release of information and potentially a meeting. Our objective at this point is to come back to Council or Committee on or about the 1st of April and share with you the calculated rates and the capital programs that inform those rates, and looking to receive your feedback at that time. And then what we'll need to do is release a background study on or about the 25th of April, because it needs to be available 60 days prior to Council's consideration of a new bylaw, which we scheduled for sometime in the third week of June, with the holding of the formal public meeting in mid-May. And Madam Chair, that's the end of my formal presentation.
Thank you very much. We can ask questions now. Councillor Johnston, did you have a question? Or are you? You're good? Okay, that's okay. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. So this is the very first step of this process. So I see that we don't have a whole lot of time dedicated, but my understanding then is some of the finer aspects of this will come back to committee for us to hone in on. So is there any overarching, I'm struggling with what kind of input you're looking for at this point from council or committee?
I will look to staff, perhaps.
Ryan, did you want to answer?
Sure. I would say from council, if there is interest, we've mentioned that on the staff side of things, we don't have any planned major policy changes to the existing bylaw. If there are policy type changes that you're interested in involving in the next DC study, it would be helpful to have that now. We can do some research, come back with recommendations, those types of things, but really this meeting was a whole lot more for understanding. A lot of council hasn't been through one of these before, at least half of council hasn't been through one of these, just to provide a bit of an update as to what the process looks like and where it could go. And
even for us that have, it's been quite some time. So nothing precludes us then, because there's a whole bunch of aspects, and not that I'm necessarily saying we want to go down this road, but nothing precludes us from looking at things like exemptions down the road. Does it need to be part of this process? And I mean, perhaps exemptions for downtown intensification goals or affordable housing exemptions, that sort of thing. If that's not something we would look at now, we could always do that later on.
So through the chair, yes, we could do that later on. And in fact, in some of those instances, we'd actually recommend that might be a better way to do. So for instance, for affordable housing, our suggestion, I've talked to Hemson about it, would be to set the DC rates, and then council put their mind to, if we don't want to charge the full rate for a certain type of development, like affordable housing, what is that discount rate that we would want to do, and how would that be funded, and have a policy outside of the DC bylaw, because if it's included in the DC bylaw, if you want to change that, you'd have to reopen the entire DC bylaw and do another background study to affect change in that area.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the upper tier of the region, historically, if we've done something like exemptions, they've matched them, but there's nothing, that's just been an informal sort of agreement. There's nothing that they have to adhere to it going forward.
Correct. So they have wording in their bylaw that says, for instance, for downtown core exemptions, that they would match, if the lower tier municipality has one, that they would match that. I've been at a few of the meetings with the region about that. They are looking at that, whether they want to continue that, whether they want to discontinue that, or grandfather existing ones, those types of things. That's the type of language and that we're trying to match the region in understanding what they're planning to do so that we align best with them.
Okay, good. Do DCs typically vary in terms of the type of product to build? Like, would the DC charge for a condo be the same as a single detached home, or does the property size or anything like that come into consideration?
So they are not the same. I'll ask Craig to elaborate.
Yes, through the chair. On the residential side, we arrive at a charge per capita, but then the charge is levied based on what we refer to as built form. So a single and semi-detached unit would have the highest rate because it tends to have the highest number of persons living within it. Medium density units like townhouses or row houses would be lower than that because they have a lower occupancy to them. And then finally, the high density, the apartment units, are lower charges yet again because of the lower occupancies. And so we differentiate based on the number of typical people that live within each type of dwelling unit.
Is that a standard formula, or is that something that we agree upon as we go through this process?
That is the most typical approach across the province. There are one or two municipalities that it's the same charge for any type of residential dwelling unit, but virtually every other ones follow that same categorization of units.
Okay, and so the purpose of that essentially then too would be that the more dense the form, the lower the cost for infrastructure, so therefore the DC rate should be lower.
That's correct. Okay. The Development Charges Act is what we refer to as a benefits received funding tool mechanism, where when you differentiate a charge within a category, it needs to be based on the differences in the demand for services. It's one of those things that's been tested at the board before. Sometimes I get questions about, can we differentiate based on the value of the property? That's more of an ability to pay kind of tool. The legislation doesn't permit us to differentiate based on value of property. It needs to be based on some driver of demand for services that we're correlating on the residential case to population and occupancy.
That's helpful. Thank you. No further questions. I'll move this, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the presentation. I just had a question about the provincial review. Do you have any idea of what might come down? Or might come out of that?
Yes, through the chair, I'm somewhat reluctant to try to guess what the provincial government might do with respect to this. I think we had a very good consultation process. Fortunately, we ourselves from Hemson were invited to participate in that, as was AMO and the municipal finance officers and representatives from different municipalities, including Craig Dyer from the region of Waterloo. I think we made a very strong case about the importance of development charges and that they do not fundamentally impact on the supply of housing or affordability. And actually, without development charges, it might impede the ability to provide the infrastructure necessary to meet development. Having said that, I anticipate that there will be some changes to the Development Charges Act and likely limiting the scope of things that we can fund from development charges or the extent to which we can fund them. We expressed upon them also that many municipalities, including yourselves, were in the process of updating and that to be careful with any transitional provisions to the new rules.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Singh?
Yeah, just in short, Madam Chair, some of my questions were answered through Councillor Davies' questions, and through his discussion it raised some others. One of which is he raised a point about could we establish a DC rate based on the property value, and you said no. Is anything that could preclude and based on property size, when in fact would be related to value, but perhaps would allow it circumvent around that? And again, the rationale, I guess, would be the larger the property, again, it's less density, and so it's using up the same level of infrastructure, but at a lower return back to the overall community.
Yes, through the chair. Some of the differentiating that you do now between the central neighborhoods and the broader suburban areas to reflect some of those different infrastructure needs. The difficulty that we have is finding the correlation in the data to reflect different property sizes or lot sizes with respect to the types of infrastructure that are being funded from development charges. Definitely smaller lot sizes impact on the amount of linear infrastructure that's local in nature, that the developer is providing directly through the subdivision or site plan. The infrastructure that we are funding is of a broader nature, even on the engineering side, more of a trunk nature. And then when we get into issues of fire protection, recreation and park development, in my opinion, is not terribly sensitive to the density of the built form in terms of the capital needs associated with building facilities.
So I appreciate that that's your response to my question. And is that an opinion based on your assessment of that, or based on the Act that it would prohibit us?
We have to meet the test of the Act about creating the correlation for the demand for services. And so we've been working with municipalities to see if we can create that correlation to differentiate based on density. And it's proving to be a struggle, and the master servicing plans have to match that. I do think that here, Kitchener has been one that we've looked to because of the way that you treat your engineering infrastructure and differentiate it between the central neighborhoods and the more greenfield type and the suburban, and that does create a rate differential to reflect differencing and servicing. Being able to do it in the suburban area to reflect lot sizes, we haven't found this data to support that would be defensible at the board, in my opinion.
I appreciate that. And the other is, I think it's probably, you early answer to my question probably answers the same aspect of affordability. I guess the same rationale. It's difficult for us to spread that reduction if we're giving some sort of exemption affordable housing, but to spread that across the board on other charges that wouldn't be feasible.
Yes, through the chair. The legislation is very specific about this, that if council chooses to provide an exemption or a reduction in a rate for one type of built form, you can't spread that across other benefiting properties or those that you are establishing the charge for. The issue of affordable housing is an interesting one. Sometimes we have different opinions about what affordable means versus attainable, whether it's true affordable housing or just more affordable in general. As Ryan indicated, we'll be pleased to come back to council with sort of a best practices survey about what other municipalities are doing to address the needs of affordable housing and attainable housing. And my professional recommendation would be to handle it as a policy outside of the development charges, make it a comprehensive policy, maybe through a community improvement plan, and also to support the initiatives of the region. And that can be done and continue to provide either reductions or exemptions from development charges through that policy. And it's a more nimble approach that allows you to address it outside of development charge updates.
That's interesting, and thank you for that answer to elaborate. And well, final question. When we have infrastructure that's already in place, like our trails, but they could be enhancement to that infrastructure with new development that may be happening on the peripheral of our community. But those new residents in those communities would be using this enhancement of infrastructure as well. Could we or can we put that cross correlation on that improvement through the DC charge? So if we have existing trail networks, but we're considering winter maintenance and asphalting of these trails. So I'll allow you to answer.
Yes, through the chair, I'll endeavor to answer the question, and if I've slightly misunderstood it. Certainly, I'm going to answer in a general way. There's strong board decisions that support the notion that you can, as long as you're increasing the overall servicing capacity of infrastructure, that you can relate that to meeting the needs of increased development. We recognize that as you build a new facility or make improvements to something, both existing residents and new residents will utilize that. However, you're increasing the overall servicing capacity. When it comes to if there's an existing pathway that maybe it has one surface to it, and now you're going to make it a paved surface so that it increases the year-round servicing capacity of it, or maybe you've got a grass pitch and you're going to put in artificial, increasing the servicing time frame of a piece of asset. Normally we would attribute a share of it to development and a share to existing or the tax support.
Thank you. And I know my time is up. I'll just quickly finish up with saying much of this is over our heads, or especially mine at least. But as input, I would appreciate staff consider some of the comments and try to assess wherever their feasibility may be allowed for us to take advantage of. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Galloway-Seelock. Thanks for this presentation and information. I don't know if this question for you or maybe our staff, but in terms of incentivizing things, if we were wanting to choose to delay the development charges for maybe an affordable housing complex so that they don't have to bring that original charge into their financing at the start of the project, and it could save them some money. Is this where we might want to put this in?
Through the chair, the Development Charges Act itself allows for a municipality to enter into an agreement with a developer, and it has to be on an application-by-application basis, for the payment of the development charges at some point other than what is stipulated in the bylaw. The default collection point is building permit. There are municipalities that, for purpose-built affordable rental, have a deferral policy that allows for the payment of the development charges at a point later than building permits, such as occupancy or some other point, and that can be, it's already put into your bylaw now to avail yourselves of that, and it can all be done outside of the development charge bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, I will just jump in on that. So we currently do have a policy like that allows for the collection at occupancy for qualifying affordable housing units. We also have within that policy that we will pay for their, I believe it's planning fees and building fees. So we have a budget line of $30,000 in our existing operating budget to pay those costs, and that we have a policy that they don't have to pay until later, because what we heard from the community, or affordable housing community that's developing that form, is they can pay it, but because of the way they receive funding, they don't get it until later in the process. And so they are quite happy to pay, but they don't get their money from the province until later in the process. So we said we will delay payments on qualifying properties until later in the process.
Okay, those are great options. Thank you.
Mayor Verbanovic?
Thanks, Chair Galloway Seelock. Thanks for coming in today. My first question wants to really follow up on what Councillor Chapman was asking you, and I appreciate that you don't want to get too hypothetical in terms of considering where the province might go with things. But in particular, I'm interested around where the province, or if the province is looking at the area of recreational facilities as one of the areas that perhaps they may want to revisit, and if so, what have we heard in that regard?
Yes, through the chair. The second consultation session we had, hosted by the province, brought together ourselves from the municipal sector with developer representatives and roundtables. And I actually thought it was a very good process and allowed us to have more informal discussions around what it was the development industry was seeking. I think there is some suggestion from the developers that they would like to see more services added to the ineligible list. But the ones that we were hearing about were things like shelters, and maybe more social activities, maybe even social housing, and perhaps even childcare, so more upper tier activities. This was, or perhaps in response to the City of Toronto's bylaw. I did, however, hear that with respect to the 10% reduction, so that for certain services like library, once we determine the growth-related cost, we have to take 10% of that off of the top, and it has to be funded elsewhere. There was some suggestion that there were certain stakeholders from the industry that would like to see that 10% increased and potentially applied against more services, including roads, which surprised me. But I didn't hear a suggestion that, for example, indoor recreation would be completely removed from consideration for DC funding.
Okay. The other question I had has to do with, you referenced that there was a discussion particularly around the correlation between DCs and the impact it might have on housing prices or not. And I'm wondering if you can sort of specifically say, based on your experience and studies that have been done, what happens? I mean, when DC charges go down, do we necessarily see house prices come down, or do we in fact simply see that tend to get occupied by the developer? And similarly, when DCs go up, do we see all of that necessarily passed on to the consumer?
Yes, through the chair. Sort of, I think the answer is perhaps evident in the question, but my opinion as a land economist is that with respect especially to residential, that the market establishes the price of homes. and that input prices, including development charges, don't fundamentally influence the end price of a product. And indeed, in municipalities and jurisdictions where they have reduced or eliminated development charges, there's been no corresponding reduction in the price of new homes. And likewise, those jurisdictions where that are achieving some of the highest and fastest rates of growth in the province and in Southern Ontario have some of the highest rates of development charges. And studies that have been done specific, for example, in Toronto and Halton Region, where experts have been hired outside of the municipal sector to examine this, they have not seen a correlation between development charges and the rate and quantum of growth. Having said that, there can be some projects that are potentially, from a pro forma basis, on the borderline already. Things like we talked about purpose-built rental, perhaps seniors housing, where upfront capital costs, including development charges, can influence on a pro forma of whether a project moves forward or not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that appears to be all the questions that we have for you. So thank you very much for coming in, and we'll see you again in the near future.
Thank you.
Thanks. So this has been moved by Councillor Davey. Is there any comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. So now we're going to move on to the traffic calming priority roadways. And if there's any questions, Mr. Cronkite's here to answer them. Councillor Schneider?
Thank you, Chair Galloway Seelock. I want to thank staff for all the hard work they put into collecting all the data for this, and I do see that my ward is scheduled to have 2 traffic calming studies done, and in the spirit of trying to keep things a little more fair, I am willing to delay my Kenora Drive project in favor of another one, and I might suggest by looking at the statistics, and I would also want staff's input on this, but possibly switching that up with Deer Ridge Drive. Those statistics are also quite high. I don't know what the process is to have that swapped out or delayed, but I'd like to maybe just investigate that a little bit.
Okay, Mr. Cronkite?
Through you, Madam Chair, staff would have no issue if Council were to choose to alter the list for 2019 in terms of removing Kenora Drive for the install and considering Deer Ridge Drive instead.
Okay, no. Would that wouldn't take Kenora off? Would it just perhaps delay it and we'd come back maybe in 2020?
Through you, Madam Chair, no. What we would do is we would continue to conduct our annual studies, and we would leave Kenora Drive on the list, and in 2020 we would see where it falls.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ioannidis?
Thank you, Chair Galloway Seelock. Mr. Cronkite, would you be favorable in, because I myself are looking at wanting to remove the one street that's in my ward, because I haven't really heard anything. I don't know why this is going off. I haven't heard anything with residents, particular for a long time on West Forest Trail. So I'm wondering whether a seasonal approach for this year would be good and push it forward, to push it back next year. And with that funding that would have been used, if it could be used for more passive traffic calming throughout the rest of the city.
Through you, Madam Chair, what I would recommend, should we not consider West Forest Trail, and I do believe that it's a street that could benefit from seasonal traffic calming, I would recommend that we instead focus on Robert Ferry Drive from South Creek Drive to Dune South Drive, and to address Councillor Ioannidis' thoughts about in terms of reallocating that to seasonal traffic calming elsewhere. Staff will endeavor to review other potential seasonal traffic calming measures in 2019 that we may be able to bring forward in 2020 to augment the existing program as we have today.
Okay. I would like to put that forward.
To switch up Robert Ferry for
Yes.
West Forest Trail, and that the staff will look at other seasonal traffic calming on, okay.
With that funding, yes.
Okay. This doesn't usually happen, so. And I'd step up and say, hey, put one on my ward, but there's not any on the list, so. Councillor Marsh.
There is in Ward 10, though.
Yeah, fair enough.
And you know what, I will take staff's recommendation, but I'm trying to understand the logic. When we have the list, and those at the top of the list are the ones that we're addressing first, notwithstanding Sterling, because it's under construction this year, why wouldn't we just go down the list if we are confident in our ranking system? And if we need to change our ranking system, then let's direct staff to do that. I'm also concerned about the ranking system in general, because I see that the number of collisions doesn't seem to get as much of a high ranking as some enough to bring areas with high collisions closer to the top of the list. So I'm looking at, for example, St. Leger between Victoria and Guelph Street, 13 collisions in the last 3 years, which really concerns me. Of course, Holborn Drive also has 13, and I'm glad to see that that was on the list. I'm just trying to understand. So my questions are: A, what's the logic in what would be the next one if we take one off the list? And B, do we need to review our ranking system? And if so, then what would be the next steps for that?
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Cronkite.
Through you, Madam Chair, and I should preface the reason that we're focusing in on Deer Ridge Drive and Robert Ferry Drive is because of the ones that are directly following the priority ranking. Fairfield Avenue is scheduled for reconstruction in 2023, so while it's on the list, it will be addressed at that point through reconstruction and can look considerably different in terms of a reconstruction versus a traffic calming opportunity. So a reconstruction is a more holistic review of the street and is a better opportunity overall. In terms of Pioneer Tower Road, which would be 6th on the list, it has heritage designation, it has a rural cross-section, and the primary issue there really was pedestrian safety, and that was addressed by Council in 2018, I believe, with the installation of sidewalks. So before we do anything there, we want to make sure that there is that problem that was pre-existing isn't still there. We want to make sure that the conditions are being measured to what the complaint was. In terms of the ranking itself and the ranking of the points associated with collisions versus speed and volume, this is a result of extensive undertaking going back to 2015. What we heard at that point was that both with council and the community, that their primary concern when looking at traffic calming was speed and volume. So those rank higher. So to give you an idea, speed is to a maximum of 40 points, volume is to a maximum of 30 points, and collision is to a maximum of 20 points. That's the breakdown, and that was a determination, again, going from what the community had asked for and what council at the time had asked for as well.
So help me understand, what is the ultimate purpose of traffic calming, if not to prevent collisions?
Through you, Madam Chair, it is ultimately to prevent collisions, but at the same time, it's to make our communities more livable. So part of making our communities more livable is also to reduce speed and reduce volume and create a sense of place and create a sense of comfort on our roadways as well.
Yeah, I can see that. I just I think that ultimately when we look at it across the board, across the city, we see traffic calming as a priority for residents generally, regardless of whether the street makes it on this list. And so I can understand where you're coming from, but I would like to propose that we direct staff to relook at this ranking system and increase the value that we have for a maximum rating for collision. I don't want to change policy willy-nilly, but I want us to look into it, because I'm concerned when we have the maximum value ranking for collisions at just 20, and the others can supersede it. So when we have so many collisions, and Pioneer Tower Road has 0 collisions in the last 3 years. Anyway, so I'm concerned about that. I'd like to see to ask staff when we could look at these next. When can we come back with some recommendations after looking at it?
Mr. Reedman, you want to say something?
Through the chair, so this policy was reviewed relatively short time ago. Within transportation services, there are a number of major priorities that are underway right now, so I would have concerns totally revisiting a policy and program that isn't currently on the priority list. So we're doing a cycling trails master plan refresh, pilot projects with protected infrastructure that we're trying to achieve by this year, as well as complete streets review, which will look at overall road design in the medium to long term. I think what we can do is go through and just take a look at the ones that have higher collisions and just see if there's some aspects around those, and rather than revamping the whole policy, just seeing what the trends are around those to see if there's other solutions that might be able to achieve those things. So generally the program has been working quite well, but there are sometimes anomalies that come up, and so I think just looking at what those anomalies might be and looking at a solution around that.
Okay, and can we have a date when staff can come back with those, with any recommendations?
So what I might suggest is on the streets that do have higher collisions that are lower down the list, that a follow-up with the individual councillor in that area may be more beneficial than an update to all of council, and then in future years that will be a consideration when we write the report as well.
Okay. All right, I'd like to ask that this be considered for the 2020 budget for us to add to the work plan, just as an issue paper.
We'll have to take a vote on that when we get there. Next is Councillor Singh.
Sorry, just I have a question for clarification for Councillor Marsh. Is that okay?
Yeah.
First. No, I appreciate the direction that you're going, and the points that you're making are absolutely valid. If you can have a revisit and look at how we prioritize, completely understandable. But your suggestion of it being part of 2020 budget for issue paper, my assumption is that we could probably do it as part of our current resources. If nothing else, it should be part of the strat plan, not budget, don't you think?
Right. Yeah, I don't care how it comes forward. I just want to see, I recognize that our staff are limited in, that they can't do it all, right? And we've already asked them to do a lot in transportation services. So in recognition of the fact that we've heard back from staff that 2019 is not doable to do anything comprehensive, I'd like to see it included, you're right, in the business plan for this.
Thank you. And my question to Mr. Cronkite, quickly on a little bit further to Councillor Schneider's request of perhaps having Kenora into next year, and your reply was, well, no, it would have to be reevaluated amongst all the other priorities. Could, if he still chooses to want to go in this direction, could Council not give direction saying that Kenora be part of 2020?
Through you, Madam Chair, that would be to Council's discretion. However, I would recommend against that simply because, as you see annually, the list does fluctuate, and there may be, come 2020, if Council takes that approach, other streets with competing priorities that you may want to address in lieu of Kenora Drive in 2020.
Again, I'm not interested to debate that, and it's simply my only comment would be that I guess we would have still 2 other streets that could still meet that capacity to look at to accommodate that need. But again, I'll leave it to Councillor Schneider if he wants to entertain it that way. But I would be supportive if you're letting go of this year in lieu of another street that is being picked and accelerated, and you want Kenora pushed up to next year. I would be supportive of with that direction as opposed to leaving the staff to determine.
Mr. Riemann, did you have something to add?
Through the chair, I just wanted to qualify a little bit further on the collisions. So if you look at the column 2 after, so there's a collisions per kilometer column. So while the numbers are quite high on St. Ledger, when you look at per kilometer, it's actually within sort of the average range. So when we normalize over distance, the ones that generally have the higher kilometer collision or per kilometer collisions rise to the top of the list. So that is the weighting that we use, because a longer street might have more collisions, but when we normalize by distance, it helps really shift those priorities and sort them.
Okay, thank you for that. Next is Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I'm not going to move any motions, so no worries. But I do have a question. I'm not sure if all members of council have had their Complete Streets meeting with staff as of yet. I assume that they would have. And as I go through this, I see an awful lot of overlap, and it's no secret I've been critical somewhat of traffic calming, especially certain implementations like speed bumps. So my question is staff exploring, as they go down the Complete Streets pathway, like to coming back to committee, have they considered rolling this into Complete Streets as a base budget and using the criteria and data that we collect here as potential streets that we choose to be the first ones that are retrofitted for Complete Streets?
Mr. Cronkite?
Through you, Madam Chair, we haven't yet identified how we will fund Complete Streets, the program itself. We do see it as a tool that will eventually come to council and be used for reconstructions, but until we have a guideline or policy approved by council, I would hesitate to comment on how we identify funding those projects.
Okay, so my question then, I guess in your professional opinion, do you see a lot of overlap between what Complete Streets hopes to achieve and traffic calming?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, the principles are pretty much the same.
Okay, and Complete Streets right now, are they looking at retrofitting, or is it mostly just during reconstruction?
Through you, Madam Chair, we haven't yet identified how we intend to implement that holistically.
Okay, so I guess my only comment then, I would suggest, and not going to move a motion on it, but just as a note to staff, that when that does come back, I would look at the data we collect here as potential retrofit, because it doesn't make sense to me that we go back and comma street and then perhaps go back at some point in the future later and then add all of those other elements that Complete Streets would have. And it would also provide a base budget and potentially solve my speed bump issue as well.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a bit confused too. If I look at page 8-3, the project updates at Patricia Avenue is mentioned here. But if I look at the sheet that I was given with my Ward 9 overview, it doesn't appear anywhere, and nor does it appear on your 2019 warranted traffic calming priority list. So where does it fit in?
Through you, Madam Chair, once a street's been recommended for traffic calming, as Patricia Avenue has been, it's removed from the traffic calming priority list because it's already in stream for that review.
Okay.
It's already in the works.
Okay.
So it was probably last year's one that came forward that we approved.
Okay, thank you. Going back to whoa, is that you or me?
Your time's not up, it's okay.
No, okay. No, I didn't think of my time. Yes. Okay, going back to these sheets that I was handed the other day, does 18 collisions under collision criteria mean that there were 18 collisions on that street?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not sure. So the pamphlet you were handed out was part of the seasonal traffic calming program, the discussion. I don't have that sheet in front of me, so I'm not entirely sure in terms of the number that you're referring to, if it's an absolute number for collisions or if it's a rated collision per kilometer number. It would be one or the other.
Okay, because, I mean, if I look at Park Street or I look at Strange Street, you know, Park Street is 18 collisions, Strange Street is 14, and yet it doesn't appear anywhere in this list. I mean, if we're looking at collisions, right, which was a concern mentioned earlier. So again, I think it's maybe a bit confusing how we come to identify these particular sites. That's the comment, really.
Through you, Madam Chair, for point of clarification, what you see on that list are warranted streets that have been warranted for traffic calming. So there is a minimum benchmark that streets must meet, which is the 55 kilometer 85th percentile and a minimum of 1,000 vehicles per day. So if you don't see a street like Strange Street as an example on this list, it's because it hasn't met those minimum benchmarks. Park Street's a different example. Park Street is considered an arterial, and arterials are not considered for traffic calming.
Okay, thank you.
All right, going for a second round. Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Galloway Seelock. I should clarify with my request that I just kind of want to share the wealth with these traffic studies. In the first term, I've had Daimler Drive, Sims Estate Drive, Old Chicopee Drive, Zeller Drive. Of the top 10 on this list, 4 are in Ward 2. So I'm just trying to kind of spread the wealth. So I'm perfectly comfortable with leaving it up to the decision of staff. If you want to consider St. Ledger Street, I am totally open to that. I don't want to direct where the alternate study would go. I would leave that up to your expertise. I rather enjoy our traffic calming meetings. Mr. Cronkite does a great job and his staff have hosted them. It's a great way to get out and meet people. But I just want to kind of share the wealth. That's my thought behind that. So I would like to move that would delay Kenora Drive and at the discretion of staff and maybe discussion with other councillors to choose another street.
Okay, Councillor Ioannidis.
Didn't we just have Christmas? My question is more or less some clarification around Councillor Marsh, and I'm sorry I can't hear because I got a bit of a head cold and I don't know, the acoustics
It's a hard time hearing in here today. I'm having a hard time
hearing too. I'm having a hard time hearing. So I'm wondering the review, if there is a review, what are we looking at a review for this traffic calming process that Councillor Marsh was asking for?
Okay, why don't we go to Councillor Marsh first?
What I wanted was for us to add it for over the next 4 years, but ideally for in 2020, because I know 2019 work plan is full up. So in 2020 is that's when I...
For the next year, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Because what my train of thought is I'm becoming more and more disillusioned with the formal traffic calming process. And what I found is last year I pushed out McGarry Drive and put the seasonal, and that seemed to work very well. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the dollars, cents to that, I think it was a lot bigger bang for buck. So I'm all forward for a review because I think the formal traffic, it's good, but I think it's past its time. I think we need to look further, and that's why I put forward to have new additional tools for passive calming tools, because I think that's the direction I think, but I'm not, again, this is what council would need to decide. So that's why I'm looking at that angle instead of increasing or looking at adjusting the process in the markings.
So you're asking for something that's different than what I'm asking for, like a total overhaul, basically, or like a broader review? Yeah. And I guess we have time to decide that, right? Because we're not able to make that decision today anyway.
I think we would be able to give that direction, but we won't be making the final decision today. Councillor Ioannidis, did you have anything else? Okay. Mayor Verbanovic?
Just further to Mr. Reedman, you said we recently did a review. When did that happen?
Mr. Cronkite?
Through you, Madam Chair, that review was conducted and approved in 2015.
Okay, so during the last term of council. So has a significant amount changed since then in terms of approach and so on? I understand some of the frustrations with the score, but I'm also concerned with all the other work that, you know, we want to get done. Is this, do we need to revisit something that has, quite frankly, been through a comprehensive review that most of us have been part of during the last term? I guess I'm wondering if I can get some clarification from staff in terms of what would we be looking at in terms of changing here.
Go ahead, Mr. Cronkite.
Through you, Madam Chair, the approach and methodology to traffic calming generally in the industry hasn't changed over the past few years. What has changed within the City of Kitchener is the development of both a resident-led traffic calming program and a seasonal traffic calming program. So I think further to what Councillor Ioannidis has suggested, what you're tending to see are more creative solutions to what the public had seen as traditional concerns in the past. So that's the primary change over the last couple of years.
And I tend to agree. I mean, I think a number of those changes have been received positively by residents in some of those areas. So I guess I'm just trying to understand, Councillor Marsh, in terms of the overall scope of the work that you're asking for. And then I guess I would like to get an indication, and I don't know if we can get that today from staff. Is this something that could fit in the 2020 or later work plans?
Well, it's something that we can obviously refer to the 2020 business plan. It doesn't necessarily mean that then it's at least put in where it can be weighed with whatever other projects Transportation Services has at the time, right? So it's kind of just flagging it to make sure it's there when we discuss the 2020 business plan.
Well, yeah, that's different than sort of specifically saying it's going to happen in 2020.
Right.
Anyway, so Councillor Marsh, if you can respond to my question.
So in my comments, the reason I brought this up is because I'm looking at the number of collisions and even the number of collisions per kilometer. They don't seem to get as much weight as other values. And so I'm concerned when we have a street with 13 or 12 collisions in the last 3 years that is ranked lower than a street with 0 collisions. And so the scope of work I was looking at was specific to the ranking for collisions. However, when Councillor Ioannidis, asked for clarification, he's looking at the whole scope of traffic calming, the traditional traffic calming, and would like to see it reviewed. And so I think that perhaps what we could do, rather than making a definitive decision today about what's going to happen, I think that what I'd like to ask is that we talk to staff, those who are interested, to discuss a little further, get a few more details about what would be involved, and then come to a decision when we have more information.
I think that's actually a good idea, and that would be helpful. I think it would make some sense for us to understand, and maybe, for some folks to have a refresher with staff around, how are these various points, how have we come up with those, and why do we use the ones that we do? And that may even be of benefit to the new councillors in particular, so that they're familiar with that process. And then we can factor in the kinds of things that Councillor Ioannidis has talked about, because I agree we may be able to do more in terms of the limited season and the resident-led processes for the same amount of money, which would again be a win as well. So I would certainly be supportive of having some of that offline dialogue and then potentially seeing it come back.
Mr. Reedman, did you have something you want to include?
So staff are happy to meet with councillors one-on-one to provide a refresher. There is some rationale, which we haven't gotten into all the detail about why the weights are set the way they are, but we're happy to do that and think that would be a good next step.
As the chair, I don't know if anyone else is thoroughly confused, but I've lost our way, unfortunately. What I see is that we have 3 traffic calming reviews that are being put forward, 2 of which are being recommended to be removed or delayed. And so what we're trying here today to, outside of anything else, I'm trying to bring it back to the report from today. Which 3 are we going to move forward with? Understanding that Kenora is being recommended for a delay, as well as West Forest Trail. So does anybody want, I know Mr. Cronkite's mentioned Robert Ferry Drive, I know Councillor Schneider mentioned Deer Ridge Drive. Did anybody want to insert one of their, I don't have one, or I would, one of their streets instead of Kenora or West Forest Trail? Unfortunately, Deer Ridge is in Councillor Gazzola's ward, and Robert Ferry is in Councillor Michaud's ward, so they're not here today to speak to them specifically. So does anybody have, like, Councillor Marsh, do you want to put St. Leger forward, or just... Oh, it's fine. It's fine. If you don't want to bring St. Leger forward, that's fine. Okay. I don't have a motion for anything at this point, so I look to someone to make a motion with respect to the 3 traffic calming reviews that we can move forward with this year. I'm not talking about the review right now. I'm not talking about... Is anybody willing to make a motion? Well, if that's what you want to do. Okay, so if I understand correctly, then we would be moving forward with Deer Ridge Drive, Robert Ferry Drive, and... Yeah.
I'll leave it to discretion to staff. I think part of what I was asking for was the funding for West Forest Trail for this year be used for additional passive calming measures for the rest of the city.
But that would then need council.
For 2020.
It's not up to staff to make that decision. It's up to council to make that decision and give direction to staff.
Well, then I'll give that direction then for 2020.
So in essence, what we did at budget was put forward and argue about getting 3 traffic calming reviews done every year because of the list that we have, and now we're saying, no, let's take the money away, which we already gave them extra seasonal traffic calming dollars, and put more money towards it.
It's to find another tool is what I'm asking for them to, instead of using the one bollard with the traffic sign, with the speed limit, and then the radar, if there's another tool out there, that's what I would like to see, because I think a little more of a holistic approach would make me feel more comfortable than having the full traffic calming process.
But then why wasn't that argued at budget?
Because the reason why that wasn't argued at budget, because I didn't think it would be something that was acceptable at the time, and now that I got my seasonal one and seen the statistics from that, which is what happened today, which coincidentally was today, so I got my evidence to show that it worked.
Okay, so what I am currently understanding is that we have a motion on the floor. Oh, sorry, this is my first time chairing without Holborn is the street I wanted. To move forward with Holborn. That's correct, Councillor Schneider. And then to delay Kenora Drive. Okay. It's okay. Just let's see what you have to say, and then I'll figure out how to deal with it. I think the difficulty with this, just the second, I don't have a problem with the first paragraph, with the second is that it comes down to what council directs with regards to traffic calming. I don't think it's, unless staff have said Deer Ridge Drive, and it would be clear for us to put forward the actual streets. Mr. Cronkite, what would your recommendation be?
Through you, Madam Chair, if you were to delay Kenora, I would suggest including Deer Ridge Drive.
Okay. Okay. Mayor Verbanovic?
Okay, and then Councillor Ioannidis is also asking that West Forest Trail be delayed, but you're suggesting that we go back to an option that Council decided not to pursue at budget time.
Just for this year, not to pursue another street, just for this year. So that funding, so that funding can be used for passive, another tool.
I guess I'm just struggling, Councillor Ioannidis, because Council went a different, I think I'm agreeing with the chair here that that was in the report, if you recall, when we dealt with it at budget time, and we said, okay, we don't want that. We want additional of the flexi things and so on, and put additional dollars aside for that, and didn't go ahead with that recommendation. So now you want to go back to that recommendation.
And partly because I didn't have the evidence to suggest that what those passive calming measures were working until I added this my meeting today. So
okay.
That's the problem. That's why I'm suggesting that, because it seemed to work very well, and the statistics show that it worked very well on McGarry Drive, the passive.
So my question to staff then would be, if those dollars were available, do you think a third street for this year should be the priority, or would you prefer to see the dollars be spent in the way that you recommended at budget time?
Mr. Egan, you want to add something?
Yeah, through the chair. So staff would recommend another formal traffic calming project rather than additional low-cost measures. So staff did review a suite of options, and the only two that are really available at this point in time are the speed advisory signs and those flexi signs. Each of those have operating costs, which would put pressures on INS in terms of installing and removing, which we do not have budget for at this point in time. So it would be the capital cost to purchase them, but also putting them in and taking them out, whereas a formal traffic calming program is properly budgeted for through this. And so staff would recommend going through the list with the next project, which is Robert Ferry Drive on the list, that isn't being covered through other mechanisms.
Councillor Johnston?
Yes, thank you, through you. I was going to suggest actually something similar as well. Excuse me, and I don't have a problem leaving it at the discretion of staff. They've got the evidence there. They've done the research in terms of coming up with what the next street should be for this. So if it's Robert Ferry Drive, then I think that would probably make the most sense.
Councillor Marsh.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
That's okay. So you have now moved the recommendation to delay Kenora, remove West Forest Trail, and move forward with Deer Ridge Drive and Robert Ferry Drive. Okay. Is everybody clear as to what we're voting on? Everyone ready? Any other comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Maybe we should, outside of that, deal with how we're going to bring forward. Obviously, there's some will around here to look at traffic calming again. What would be the best method to do that? Is there any suggestions, Justin or Barry, before I turn to staff? Justin?
Through the chair, so I think follow up with Councillor Marsh and any other councillors that would like a bit of an update on how the weighting was identified. And then in addition, there's some one-on-one engagement happening right now on complete streets work. That work will be presented back to council, and there's opportunities around our cycling master plan. All of these are working together to create safer streets. So it's a broad suite of programs that are coming forward. So I think we have a pretty good strategy overall, but I think it's bringing some members of council up to speed and hearing more about what comes out of this, as well as through our strategic plan work. Traffic and transportation and safety has been identified as one of the number one priorities. So as we bring forward the strategic plan work, council will see goals and objectives outlined through that as well.
Okay, Councillor Marsh?
Thanks. Yeah, I think I'm pretty up to speed on how things work. I just think that personally, I think it needs tweaking. And so I'm happy to sit down with staff and get a refresher on how they have set it up. But I also, what I want to do is learn more and not do anything today and discuss, with staff and perhaps with other colleagues on a one-on-one basis, and then possibly bring something back at a later date in terms of a motion.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Verbanovic?
That's exactly where I was going to go.
Okay, perfect. Then we are all done traffic calming for today. All right, moving on to the summary water report for January to December 2018. Angela is here to give us a 5-minute presentation. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Angela Mick, and I am the Utilities Water Engineer at Kitchener Utilities. Every year we bring forward 2 reports to summarize the drinking water system and to meet the requirements of the Safe Drinking Water Act. It's the Drinking Water Quality Management System Management Review Report, so I'll just call that the DWQMS, and the Summary Water Report. The standard of care was enacted on January 1st, 2013 under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and it imposes a standard of care on every person who, on behalf of the municipality, oversees the accredited operating authority, which is Kitchener Utilities, of the system, or exercises decision-making authority over the system. There's a 3-hour training session, to inform councillors on April 10th, and this will go over your responsibilities under the Act. I'd suggest that you try to attend that session if you haven't attended one before. To deliver drinking water, Kitchener Utilities must have a license, and we have a number of elements that we must keep up to date and current, along with annual inspections and auditing and reporting. The DWQMS essentially is a system that documents what we do through procedures and work instructions outlined in our operational plan and emergency manual. We audit to ensure that we do what we say we do. The annual management review evaluates the continuing suitability and effectiveness of the DWQMS to assist with decision making. Some key elements in the report include incidents of regulatory non-compliance, infrastructure renewal, annual risk assessments, results of audits, any changes that could affect the QMS, and resources to maintain. The DWQMS is a living document, and there are regulatory requirements to continually improve that document. The operational plan will be brought forward to Council for re-endorsement in the spring after the training session. For 2018, we continued with implementation of maintenance activities outlined under the WIP. That included our water main cleaning, valve turning, replacing broken valves. We hired a cross-connection control clerk to assist with compliance. In 2019, we plan to continue with the water main cleaning, valve turning, meter replacements. We also plan to do some more maintenance activities, including hydrant painting. We're working on some mobile solutions for inspections. We're working with the region on bringing some new large diameter water mains to service the southwest end, mostly the new development down there. One of the challenges we have in Kitchener Utilities are new regulations. So we don't often, we don't often get a lot of notice for new regulations, and also we have to respond to them fairly quickly. So there was a new regulation last year that required Kitchener Utility staff to witness every time the water main is cut open to ensure that the drinking water is not contaminated. This work was witnessed before by our inspectors, but now people with water license, so Kitchener Utility staff have to witness the work. And we must respond to the contractor's schedules for both our own reconstruction projects and development. And it's just one of our challenges trying to maintain the additional workload. And as part of the budget process, we obtained 3 new staff, so this will help us manage this workload and try to include the maintenance activities. The 2 reports work together. The DWQMS would document how to calibrate equipment, how to take a water sample, and how to fill out paperwork, whereas the annual water quality report is about compliance. Are we taking enough samples? What are the sample results? Do they fall within the parameters? What happens when they're outside the parameters? We continue to meet the requirements of the Safe Drinking Water Act, and after I wrote the council report, we did receive our inspection report from the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, and there are no non-compliances. Are there any questions on either report?
Currently, I don't see any questions. Does anybody have any questions for Angela? Mayor Verbanovic?
Just one, you had referenced the training sessions.
Yes.
At the beginning. So last term, and I've asked this question of staff, but since you're here, you can maybe answer it. Last term, those were required sessions for all members of council. Is that not the case this term, or is it only required sessions for people who haven't previously had them?
Through the chair, I don't know, actually. I would assume that if you've taken the session before, you don't need to take it again, but I'll have to look at the invite and see what it said.
Can we get clarity on it? Because there was I know, significant concern around this issue last time, and it was a mandatory thing for all of council, and I don't know if it's the kind of thing that you have to keep yourself up to date every certain period of time, or once is enough, and then we just need to make sure that the new people go through it, just to make sure that we're being held in compliance with our obligations post-Walkerton.
I'll get back to you on that for sure.
Councillor Chapman?
Yes, thank you. If Bill 66 is passed at the provincial level, how will that modify what the City of Kitchener does with its water management?
I'm not really sure.
Ms. McGoldrick has requested to speak. Go ahead.
So through the chair, the Bill 66 was, the original proposal put forward was related more to source water, so responsibilities of the region of Waterloo. It would not impact the distribution system, so it wouldn't change any of our practices, but certainly in terms of our partners. I do believe, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, that component of Bill 66 was removed in the last iteration.
She said it was removed in the last iteration.
Okay. I thought it was just the green space one that was removed, clause 10. Oh, it was a clean water one? Okay, thank you.
All right, that's all the questions that we have. Does someone want to move this report? Moved by Councillor Johnston. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And the last report is just for information, so Mayor Verbanovic.
Just one
I think if you want to discuss it, do we not have to take a motion because it's in information? All right, moved by Mayor Verbanovic to take it out of information. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So just to be clear, so we had the provincial cap and trade program. We added that onto the bills. We then subsequently took it off the bills. Now the new federal legislation has been implemented, and now we have to put an amount that seems to be a lesser amount than the original amount, or is it not, back onto the bills unless we can get an exemption. But it sounds like we can't get an exemption. And so I guess two questions. Have we asked and have been told we can't, or we just assume we can't? And then number two, is it talks about others perhaps being able to get the exemption. I'm not 100% clear on it. And so what I'm wondering is for people that are purchasing through third parties and not using Kitchener Utilities, but in Kitchener Utilities territory, are they not having to pay this amount, or do they have to pay it as well? Just want to make sure that there's a consistent approach to this.
Through the chair, so the exemptions is for industry. If they would remit the levy or charge themselves directly to the federal government.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's what it is. Everybody's going to be paying the same, but to maybe add some more information in terms of the charge for this year, I think it's going to be, because it starts in April, it's going to be about $5.5 million we're going to collect from our customers based on that. And as the fee or charge increases for a full year, it would be $10 million. And then in the next year, I think it's $10 million, $15 million, $20 million, then $25 million in 5 years. In regards to the fees that we would be collecting and rebating that to the CRA for the carbon.
Okay. And then people will be getting presumably credits back through the income tax process, which I understand this year has a whole process attached to it around getting some of those dollars back.
Through the chair, that is my understanding as well. It's $300 as we know now, but the whole platform is not really unveiled yet, so we're learning information as it's becoming available.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Davey.
Yeah, thank you. Just I wanted to clarify that as well. So you have in the financial implications $44.20 for part of the year, but just doing the math, it looks like when this is fully implemented, it's going to be, well, even for one full year, it's about $60, but when it's fully implemented in 3 or 4 years, it's going to be $150 added on the bill. Now, I know that we are going to break it out on the bill and say federal government.
Through the chair, that is correct. So it's currently I've seen in testing a separate line just before HST, and it says federal carbon charge, and it's going to be the 3.91 cents times how many cubic meters are consumed.
Okay, so it's important to include that. So, but again, looking at right now the government's saying 90% of the revenue, so the whole property owners will be made whole, like homeowners will be made whole, but the people that are going to get, looks like they're going to get hit by this mostly without being paid back will be the businesses that pay natural gas. They don't get anything back.
Through the chair, so how my understanding is that, yeah, so you're going to be paying for it on natural gas usage, you're going to be paying through it for usage for your fuel for your car, anything that burns like carbon or you're going to emit greenhouse gases. So of that, we're going to be able to get back approximately $300 through your taxes from the federal portion.
So that $300 figure is interesting because if they're only collecting 44, then obviously that goes to our gas, like our gasoline in cars and everything else, where they get that $300 figure. So presumably then that figure should be rising over the years if they're increasing what they're charging for carbon over the years as well. So is that $300 going to go up by the same 2.5 times they're raising the rates? Do you know? Have they said anything about that? So I'm noting that if we're getting $300 now, but they're only charging $20 per ton, when it goes up to $50 per ton, is that $300 supposed to go up 2.5 times?
Through the chair, I can't speculate on that one. I don't know at this time what they're going to do in future years.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
All right, that appears to be all the questions.